You're locked inside a prison designed to be impossible to escape. Armed guards, metal doors, constant surveillance, and somehow, someone breaks out using food, trash, or just pure confidence. No genius plans, no Hollywood action, just unbelievably dumb ideas that somehow worked. These are 44 real prison escapes that sound fake, but aren't. 1. Indiana, 1934. A maximum security jail filled with heavily armed guards. Infamous bank robber John Dillinger is completely trapped. His grand escape tool? A simple block of wood and a cheap tin of black shoe polish. He meticulously carves the wood into the rough shape of a pistol. He slathers it in the dark polish until it shines like cold steel. He waits for the perfect moment. When the guard approaches, Dillinger aggressively shoves the shiny stick right in his face. It is a fake gun, a literal child toy. But the terrified guard instantly panics and surrenders. Dillinger takes 17 highly trained law enforcement officers hostage, locking them inside his own cell. He casually strolls out the front door, steals the local sheriff personal vehicle, and vanishes. The police department becomes a national laughingstock before dinner. 2. Germany, 1943. A fortress prison camp is built to crush patience before it crushes hope. Guards count heads constantly. Searchlights sweep the yard. Every fence line is watched like a hawk. So the prisoners stop staring at the walls and start studying the pipes. Beneath one barracks runs a foul drainage channel nobody wants to inspect too closely because the smell alone feels like punishment. Over weeks, using stolen scraps of metal and pure stubbornness, they loosen a grate and widen the opening a little at a time. On a stormy night, when the weather turns the whole compound into mud and noise, one prisoner slides straight into the freezing filth, crawls through the drainage line, and comes out beyond the perimeter smelling like death and looking exactly like freedom. 3. Japan, 1944. An isolated freezing prison in Hokkaido. Yoshi Shiratori is locked inside a custom-made cell with heavy iron doors and incredibly thick handcuffs designed specifically to hold him. Defeating this impenetrable metal security system requires heavy explosives. He uses his daily lunch. For months, Shiratori secretly spits small drops of salty miso soup onto his iron handcuffs and the heavy door slot. Over time, the heavy sodium in the soup actually causes the thick metal bolts to slowly rust and deteriorate. One freezing night, he simply snaps the rusted cuffs with pure strength. He dislocates his own shoulders, squeezes through the tiny rusted food slot, and vanishes into the snowy darkness. He literally dissolved a maximum security prison with a bowl of traditional soup. 4. The Tower of London was the ultimate medieval black site. William Maxwell, the Earl of Nithsdale, is scheduled to be horribly executed for treason the very next morning. The elite royal guards are on high alert. Desperate, his wife visits his cell, smuggling in a giant dress, a ridiculous wig, and heavy cosmetics. Maxwell quickly shaves his thick beard, squeezes into the tight dress, and executes the absolute dumbest walkout imaginable. He buries his face in a fancy handkerchief and loudly fake sobs like a severely distressed noblewoman while stomping past the heavily armed guards. Rather than stopping this suspiciously muscular crying lady, the guards actually step aside out of sheer British politeness. A condemned traitor literally cries his way out of a guaranteed beheading. 5. Alcatraz, 1962. The terrifying island fortress is surrounded by freezing water and deadly currents. Inmates face heavily armed patrols and hourly bed checks. Escaping is scientifically impossible. But 3 clever prisoners defeat this intense surveillance system using leftover hygiene products. They secretly collect wet toilet paper, cheap cafeteria soap, and random hair swept up from the prison barbershop floor. They meticulously sculpt terrifyingly realistic fake human heads and tuck them into their beds. As the fugitives shimmy down dirty ventilation shafts and paddle a makeshift raincoat raft into the dark ocean, the highly trained night guards spend hours faithfully shining their heavy flashlights on sleeping piles of soapy toilet paper. The absolute peak of federal security was defeated by elementary school arts and crafts. 6. Virginia, 1864. Over 1,000 captive soldiers are crammed into Libby Prison, a miserable converted warehouse surrounded by heavily armed sentries. The foundation is thick, the ground is freezing. The prisoners have absolutely zero access to shovels or metal pickaxes. They break into the dark, rat-infested basement and decide to dig their way to freedom using their dinner trash. Working entirely in the pitch-black dirt for weeks, they carve through the freezing earth using nothing but basic wooden soup spoons and discarded clamshells from their rations. They quietly excavate a massive underground tunnel right under the boots of the walking guards. Over 100 men simply crawl through the clamshell highway and disappear into the night without triggering a single alarm. 7. London, 1724. Legendary thief. Jack Shepherd is chained to the solid stone floor of the darkest dungeon in England. Escaping should be impossible. He finds a single crooked rusty nail on the ground. Instead of throwing it away, he miraculously uses it to pick massive iron padlocks. After shedding his heavy chains, he snaps an iron bar from the chimney. He brutally smashes through 6 separate heavily locked doors and climbs onto the dizzying prison roof. But the absolute most absurd part of his daring midnight run is the finale. Instead of fleeing into the dark forest, Shepherd immediately breaks into a local pub. He happily drinks a warm pint of ale while still wearing his clanking metal leg shackles. Total disrespect to the crown. 8. Venice, 1756. History remembers Giacomo Casanova as a legendary romantic, but his escape from the Doge Palace proves he was a master of pure audacity. After carving a hole in the ceiling and sneaking into an empty administrative office, he hits a massive roadblock. The final heavy door to the courtyard is locked from the outside. Panic time? Not for Casanova. He completely changes into his absolute finest silk aristocratic clothes and waits for sunrise. When a random guard walks past the window, Casanova aggressively yells at him. He acts like a furious, high-ranking government official who got accidentally locked inside after a late meeting. The guard is so intimidated by Casanova and his fancy outfit that he quickly unlocks the gate and deeply apologizes to the escaping fugitive. 9. The American West, 1880. A ruthless outlaw is locked in a dusty frontier cell. The grumpy sheriff sits right outside the iron bars. A massive guard dog patrols the office like a 4-legged deputy with anger issues. Escape looks impossible, but the prisoner understands one basic truth of life. Almost everyone has a price, and sometimes that price is beef grease. For days, he saves scraps from his miserable meals and slowly wins over the dog. One night, the sheriff drifts off with the keys resting just out of reach. The outlaw coaxes the animal closer, nudges the key ring near the bars, and turns the jail-toughest watchdog into the most embarrassing accomplice in frontier history. 10. Pennsylvania, 1932. You might think breaking out of a heavily fortified penitentiary requires a massive riot or complex explosives. Bank robber Willie Sutton simply relies on the magic of looking busy. Sutton somehow manages to steal a basic mechanic's uniform and gets his hands on an ordinary wooden ladder. Rather than waiting for a dark and stormy night, he boldly throws the ladder over his shoulder in broad daylight. He marches straight toward the towering outer wall. The armed guards in the watchtowers watch him approach. But since he looks incredibly confident and carries a professional tool, they assume he is just a hired contractor fixing the masonry. He places his ladder against the impregnable wall, climbs over, and vanishes into the busy street. 11. Siberia, 1907. A frozen wasteland. Armed guards watch every movement. The temperature is deadly. Walking away means freezing to death instantly. The prisoner is political exile Leon Trotsky. Instead of fighting the guards, he uses psychology. He secretly gets the night watchman heavily drunk on cheap smuggled alcohol until they completely pass out. He sneaks out into the bitter cold, but he does not walk. He meets a hired local smuggler waiting in the absolute middle of nowhere. His getaway vehicle? A wooden sleigh pulled by a team of actual reindeer. While the Russian military searches the frozen train stations and secure checkpoints, Trotsky is literally dashing through the snow like a political Santa Claus. riding Reindeer all the way to absolute freedom. 12. France, 1846. You would assume a future emperor would need a highly sophisticated plot to escape a maximum security military fortress. Nope. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte just uses a piece of wood. Realizing that civilian contractors are freely walking in and out of the Fortress of Ham to do renovations, he shaves off his instantly recognizable mustache. He throws on a filthy, oversized worker shirt. He hoists a massive wooden plank onto his shoulder, perfectly obscuring his face, and simply walks toward the main exit. The heavily armed guards just see a guy doing miserable manual labor and totally ignore him. He literally marches straight across the main drawbridge to complete freedom because absolutely nobody wants to make eye contact with a man doing heavy lifting. 13. Winter of 1863. A massive military prison camp sits under a fresh blanket of snow. Elite trackers are ready to chase down anything with footprints. One wrong move means capture before sunrise. The prisoner studies the white ground and realizes the snow is both the trap and the answer. He waits for terrible weather, then slips out during blowing wind and drifting snow. Instead of sprinting wildly, he moves with brutal patience, choosing rough ground, brush, and frozen patches where his trail breaks apart almost immediately. By dawn, the search teams are staring at scattered prints, false leads, and wind-blown gaps. The storm does half the escaping for him while the trackers waste hours chasing a trail the sky already erased. 14. A heavily fortified detention center for political rebels. Armed guards search wagons, inspect doors, and treat every package like it might explode. Escaping through the gate looks impossible. Escaping through the walls looks insane. That is exactly why the prisoner chooses the wall. During repair work inside the building, he notices one section has been opened and crudely sealed again with loose stone and fresh mortar. Night after night, he quietly chips into the hollow space behind it and creates a cramped hiding place inside the masonry itself. When a surprise inspection tears through the prison the next morning, guards search cells, floors, and courtyards while the missing prisoner is literally inches from their boots, sealed inside the wall like a very angry ghost. After the panic settles and the outer work crew returns, he slips out among the rubble and disappears. 15. South Africa, 1899. A brutal prisoner of war camp in Pretoria. The captive is a young, highly ambitious British journalist named Winston Churchill. The walls are heavily patrolled. Searchlights cut through the dark. He does not have weapons or disguises. He just waits for the exact second the guards look away and blindly leaps over a massive iron fence. He wanders the hostile landscape for days. Desperate, he secretly jumps onto a moving commercial train, burying his entire body under piles of filthy black coal. For 3 terrifying days, he hides in the suffocating darkness while armed soldiers walk right past his wagon. Covered entirely in black soot, Churchill eventually rides the freight train straight across the border to absolute freedom. 16. Australia, 1867. Authorities are so utterly exhausted by a convict named Moondine Joe, constantly escaping that they build a special reinforced stone cell just for him. The governor arrogantly promises Joe his absolute freedom if he ever manages to break out of this ultimate fortress. To keep him busy, guards order him to break rocks in the courtyard. They completely forget they are literally handing a master escape artist a heavy metal pickaxe. Joe piles up the broken stones to block the guards' line of sight. He then simply uses his trusty tool to smash a massive hole straight through the outer prison wall. By the time the guards check behind the rock pile, their most secure prisoner is already sprinting through the thick forest. 17. London, 1957. British jewel thief. Alf Hines finds himself locked inside a heavily guarded courthouse, waiting for his criminal trial to continue. He calmly requests a quick bathroom break. 2 burly police officers escort him into the restroom, standing incredibly close to ensure zero funny business. But Hines possesses the fastest hands in the country. In one lightning-fast motion, he aggressively shoves both highly trained officers straight into the tiny toilet stall and violently slams the door. Before the stunned guards can even react, Hines secures the heavy external metal bolt, trapping his own security team next to the plumbing. He casually straightens his tailored suit and walks out the front doors of the courthouse while his guards helplessly scream from the toilet. 18. The Netherlands. 1621. Weaponized laziness is a beautiful thing, and it accidentally frees a high-profile political prisoner. Dutch scholar Hugo Grotius is serving a life sentence inside a massive stone castle. His wife regularly sends him a heavy wooden chest stuffed with giant theology books so he can study. At first, guards meticulously search the heavy box. But eventually, they grow so incredibly annoyed by lifting endless stacks of boring paper that they completely stop looking. Realizing the security team is asleep on the job, Grotius dumps the books, folds his body into the tiny trunk, and waits. His wife casually asks the guards to carry the box outside. Those heavily armed soldiers literally sweat and strain to do all the heavy lifting for his grand escape. 19. New York, 1935. Infamous con artist Victor Lustig is locked in a supposedly secure federal detention center. Defeating top-tier security usually requires a riot. Lustig does it with a dirty bedsheet. He braids his ripped bed linens into a long rope. But rather than sneaking out in the dead of night, he stages his grand exit in broad daylight. He dangles out the high window and begins slowly lowering himself down the brick building. To avoid suspicion, he aggressively wipes the exterior glass with a spare rag. The armed guards and citizens on the busy street below just assume he is a highly dedicated window washer doing routine maintenance. He literally cleans his way straight to the pavement and casually strolls off into the city. 20. The Tower of London. The 16th century. Stone walls thick enough to stop a cannonball. The prisoner, John Gerard, has nothing but a single orange and a tiny piece of silk string. He squeezes the fruit and uses the acidic juice as invisible ink to write a secret message on scrap paper. His friends outside read the hidden text. At midnight, he ties the tiny silk string to a heavy iron ball and tosses it across the dark, freezing moat. His friends tie a thick rope to the tiny string. He pulls it back, anchors it to his cell window, and crawls right over the freezing water. The elite guards patrol the empty halls, totally unaware their mighty fortress was defeated by citrus fruit and sewing supplies. 21. Devil's Island. The absolute worst penal colony on Earth. Banishment here means facing brutal heat, completely isolated stone walls, and an ocean filled with deadly sharks and chaotic currents. Escaping on a normal boat is impossible. So French convict Henri Charrière decides to trust his life to tropical fruit. He spends months secretly hoarding dozens of dry coconuts. He eventually stuffs them into 2 stolen burlap sacks. After tying the giant fruit bags together to form the most ridiculous-looking makeshift raft in history, he throws it off a massive cliff into the treacherous sea and boldly jumps in after it. While the guards assume anyone hitting the water instantly drowns, this absolute madman successfully bobs his way to freedom on a pile of buoyant coconuts. 22. France, the 1890s. A notorious smuggler is serving a brutal sentence when he figures out the prison has one weak spot. Not the gate, not the walls, the infirmary. He starts complaining about agonizing stomach pain, then makes the act worse day by day, until he is pale, shaking, and convincingly half dead. The prison doctor, more interested in avoiding a corpse than solving a mystery, orders him moved under light guard to a civilian hospital for treatment. That is where the smuggler finally drops the performance. Once he reaches a room with real windows instead of iron bars, he bribes an orderly, swaps into ordinary clothes, and calmly walks out the front entrance of the hospital, while the prison guards are still arguing over medicine and paperwork. Sometimes the fastest route out of prison is pretending you might die in it. 23. Ireland, the 18th century. A highly superstitious guard detail proves that fear can be stronger than iron bars. The prisoner knows the night watchmen are obsessed with ghost stories, curses, and anything that moves strangely after dark. He gets his hands on a sack of white flour from the prison kitchen and turns himself into a human nightmare. Near midnight, he coats his body in the pale dust, rattles his chains, and staggers through the shadows like something dragged out of a village graveyard. The guards do not drop dead from terror or flee the country, but they absolutely panic and back away from their posts long enough to create chaos. In the confusion, the flour-covered inmate slips past security and disappears into the dark. 24. The American Civil War. Escaping a heavily guarded Confederate camp usually requires a massive shootout or a complex underground tunnel. Union soldier Charles Davis opts for extreme arts and crafts instead. He realizes his standard-issue wool blanket is roughly the same heavy texture as a Confederate uniform. So, he spends weeks secretly squishing wild blackberries and completely dyes his blanket a dark purple gray. He cuts it into a crude coat, carves a fake rifle out of a tree branch, and confidently falls into line with the changing guard patrol. He literally marches in perfect military formation with the enemy guards right out the front gate. When the patrol turns left, he simply turns right and walks all the way to Washington. 25. Italy, the 19th century. A prisoner is locked high inside a stone tower where every normal escape route ends in a broken neck. The door is iron. The stairway is watched. The drop outside is ugly enough to make prayer feel practical. So he turns the tower itself into the exit. He studies the giant bell above him and notices the thick rope running from the Belfry down through the structure. During a night of wild weather, when thunder is hammering the walls and no one can hear a thing, he climbs into the dark rafters, wraps himself around the bell rope, and slides down the outside of the tower as the storm covers every scrape and curse. He burns his hands raw, slams into the stone twice, and lands like a sack of bad decisions in the mud below, but he is outside the walls and still alive, which is all an escape really needs. 26. Texas, 1930s. A massive federal penitentiary decides to host guided weekend tours for wealthy civilians to show off their incredible security systems. One wildly confident bank robber realizes this is the ultimate golden ticket. While the armed guards are busy showing off the incredibly thick cafeteria bars to the gaping tourists, the inmate quickly slicks his hair back. He tucks in his shirt and casually steps right into the middle of the civilian crowd. He spends the next hour actively nodding at the tour guide, asking highly intelligent questions about the prison architecture, and loudly complimenting the strong steel doors. He simply boards the civilian tour bus at the end of the day and rides home, completely undetected by the warden. 27. France, 18th century. One prisoner figures out that iron bars are not actually the hardest thing to defeat in an old jail. Habit is. Every evening, the guards deliver soup through a narrow hatch, lock it, and move on without a second thought. The routine never changes, and that makes it dangerous. For weeks, the inmate uses grease from his meals, grit from the floor, and a stolen shard of metal to quietly work on the hatch bolts a fraction at a time. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just patient sabotage disguised as miserable dining. Then, on a miserable rainy night, the little door finally gives way. He squeezes through an opening clearly not designed for a full-grown man, drops into the corridor like human luggage, steals a cloak from a peg, and strolls into the weather while the guards still think he is inside waiting for breakfast. 28. London, Victorian era. One notorious prisoner realizes the city's greatest weakness is not mercy. It is chaos. His chance arrives when a fire breaks out in a nearby section of the jail and turns the whole building into smoke, shouting, and terrified officials barking contradictory orders. While guards rush buckets, unlock doors, and drag prisoners into safer corridors, he spots the one thing nobody is controlling: the confusion itself. He grabs a soot-covered blanket, throws it over his shoulders like he belongs in the emergency response, and joins the stream of men hauling debris toward the yard. In the smoke and panic, every face looks half-hidden and every voice sounds urgent. By the time the jail is counted and the missing inmate is discovered, he is already somewhere in London, blending into a city that was practically invented for disappearing. 29. Russia, 19th century. A prisoner in a Siberian facility knows the outer gates are guarded too closely for a bold walkout, and the wilderness beyond is too brutal for a random sprint. So he waits for something the guards actually want gone: firewood. During the long winter, sleds stacked with chopped timber leave the yard constantly to supply nearby outposts. The loads are inspected for theft, not stowaways, because nobody imagines a man would willingly hide inside a moving pile of frozen logs. He hollows out a narrow space in one sled, packs the outside with wood, and buries himself in the load wearing every scrap of cloth he owns. The team drags him through the gate, across the snow, and miles from the prison before he finally wriggles free in the forest, half numb, barely breathing, and suddenly farther from captivity than any locked door could have taken him. 30. Spain, 18th century. Getting past the outer wall of a military fortress usually means a rope, a tunnel, or a coffin. One prisoner chooses something even dumber and somehow smarter. He learns that a royal inspector is scheduled to visit in an elaborate horse-drawn carriage, complete with guards, ceremony, and enough status to make everyone else stop thinking. While the soldiers are busy saluting the arriving official and pretending to be competent, the prisoner slips into position beneath the wagon and straps himself to the undercarriage with stolen leather belts. He hangs there inches above the road, one pothole away from disaster. The gates swing open for the honored visitor, and the escaping inmate receives the most uncomfortable first-class ride in Spanish prison history. 31. France, 1986. Michel Vaujour is locked in a highly secure Parisian prison facility. The guards are heavily armed. The walls are solid concrete. He needs a powerful weapon, but he only has access to his lunch tray. He takes a handful of fresh nectarines from the cafeteria. He meticulously paints them dark green and black using stolen art supplies. He attaches cheap metal hair clips to the top. They look exactly like deadly military grenades. He suddenly storms the guard station, holding the painted fruit. The highly trained guards take one look at the explosive nectarines and immediately surrender. He literally forces his way to the prison roof using breakfast fruit, where his wife picks him up in a hijacked helicopter. 32. Australia, 19th century. Surviving a penal colony is already miserable. Escaping one sounds even worse. The fences are watched, the bush is brutal, and mounted patrols know the land far better than any convict. One prisoner notices something useful near the perimeter: livestock. He steals a filthy fleece from the shearing shed, wraps himself in the wool, and crawls low among a moving flock during a moment of weak visibility. It is not a perfect disguise. Nobody is mistaking him for prize livestock up close. But from a distance, mixed into dust, motion, and a mass of animals, he becomes one more vague shape in a field full of vague shapes. By the time the guards realize one sheep had extremely suspicious body language, he is already heading for the hills. 33. France, 17th century. The keep of Vincennes is a nightmare of stone and steel. The prisoner is practically guarded by a private army. Breaking out requires a full military siege. He chooses a much smellier option. He notices the guards never inspect the giant baskets of filthy royal laundry leaving the castle. He holds his breath and dives headfirst into a massive pile of unwashed aristocratic underwear. The basket is loaded onto a wooden cart. The heavily armed sentries stop the wagon at the main gate. They aggressively stab the laundry pile with sharp iron spears just to be safe. The blades miss the terrified prisoner by a few inches. The cart rolls over the drawbridge. The most guarded man in France escapes by smelling terrible. 34. Germany, 1943. The legendary Stalag Luft 3 is an escape-proof POW camp. The soil is bright yellow sand, so digging a tunnel is instantly noticeable. The prisoners invent a ridiculous Trojan horse. They build a massive wooden gymnastics vault out of stolen bedboards. Every single day they carry this heavy wooden horse into the courtyard. While dozens of men do noisy gymnastic jumps over the top, one man is secretly hidden inside the hollow box. He digs a tunnel directly underneath it, filling his pockets with the bright yellow dirt. At the end of recreation time, they carry the horse back inside with the dirt hidden inside it. They successfully dig a massive tunnel right in front of the snipers. 35. Scotland, 1568. Mary, Queen of Scots, is imprisoned in the heavily fortified Loch Leven Castle, located on an island in the middle of a freezing lake. Escaping requires defeating a private army of angry nobles. She realizes she cannot use force, so she uses pure charm. She befriends a young, naive teenage boy who works in the castle kitchens. During a massive royal banquet, while the strict castle warden is heavily distracted by alcohol and loud music, the teenager casually drops a napkin over the main castle keys lying on the table. He scoops them up, sneaks Mary out the back door, and locks the massive iron gates from the outside, trapping the entire army inside their own fortress. 36. Nazi Germany, Colditz Castle again. French officer Harry Neve needs a German uniform to walk out the front door of this elite fortress. He secretly tailors a stolen green theater costume, but he is missing the crucial, shiny military belt buckle. His solution is pure genius. He cuts a square of cardboard from a ration box and paints it with yellow mustard to look like shiny brass. In broad daylight, he puts on his mustard-painted belt, throws his shoulders back, and aggressively salutes the main guards. They instantly salute back. They completely fail to notice their strict military superior is wearing sandwich condiments on his waist. Neve smoothly walks right past the heavy machine guns. 37. The United States, 1971. The legendary con artist Frank Abagnale is locked in a federal detention center. He does not use tools or tunnels. He uses pure psychological warfare. Because his transfer papers are temporarily lost by a lazy administrative official, the local guards have absolutely no idea why he is there. Abagnale immediately flips the script. He confidently claims he is an undercover federal prison inspector, secretly sent to evaluate their daily security. The guards absolutely panic. They are terrified of failing his fake inspection. Over several weeks, he aggressively demands special privileges. He eventually tells them he needs to step outside the prison walls to contact his superiors. The guards practically hold the front door open for him. 38. British East Africa, 1943. 3 Italian prisoners of war are locked in an isolated British camp. They look at the massive, towering peak of Mount Kenya in the distance. They are not trying to get back to Italy. They are just incredibly bored. For 8 months, they secretly hoard their miserable food rations and build makeshift ice axes out of stolen scrap metal from the prison workshop. They sneak out of the camp in the dead of night, hike for days through the dangerous jungle, and successfully summit the freezing mountain. They proudly plant a handmade Italian flag at the top. Then, they climb back down, return to the prison camp, and literally break back in because they have nowhere else to go. 39. Ohio, 1863. Confederate General John Hunt Morgan is locked inside a heavily fortified Union penitentiary. The stone floors are completely solid, but Morgan notices something bizarre. The prison uses a complex underground air ventilation system to keep the lower cells dry. Using 2 stolen dinner knives, Morgan and his men secretly chip away at the solid stone floor beneath their beds, creating a tiny hole directly into the dark air ducts. Every time the guards walk past, they sit on their beds to hide the massive holes. They crawl straight into the claustrophobic ventilation shaft, navigate the pitch-black maze of dusty pipes, and tunnel out through the outer prison courtyard. They literally use the prison-owned architecture against it. 40. France, 1943. André Devigny is locked inside Montluc prison, scheduled for execution in 2 days. He is handcuffed inside a pitch-black cell with a massive solid oak door. Survival is mathematically 0. He finds an incredibly tiny safety pin on the dirty floor. He spends hours blindly picking his heavy iron handcuffs in the absolute dark until they snap open. He then takes a stolen metal spoon and physically carves through the massive oak door, millimeter by millimeter. After silently removing the heavy wood panels, he crawls out, strangles the night sentry with a makeshift rope, and scales the terrifying outer wall using braided bed sheets. He completely dismantled a military black site using a pin and a spoon. 41. The Wild West, A dusty frontier jail is built on confidence. The sheriff trusts the locks, the deputy trusts the sheriff, and the prisoner is supposed to trust bad luck. One outlaw decides to test all three. After days of listening, he notices the deputy has a terrible habit of hanging the spare keyring on a nail beside the office window during card games. The gap is small, the angle is worse, and the keys are just out of reach. Perfect. Using strips torn from his blanket, a bent spoon handle, and a fish-hook-shaped piece of scrap, he fashions a ridiculous little snaring tool and spends nights practicing the motion through the bars. When the lawmen get drunk and lazy enough, he flicks the improvised hook, catches the ring, reels it in inch by inch, and unlocks the cell while the entire police force is losing money at cards 10 feet away. 42. Devil Island, 1930s. René Belbenoit is trapped in a penal colony designed to make every direction look fatal. Jungle in one direction, ocean in the other. Guards everywhere in between. What finally gives him a chance is not strength. It is assignment. He manages to get placed on labor detail moving supplies along the shoreline, the kind of dull job officers stop paying attention to because it happens every day and looks harmless. Belbenoit notices that broken planks, empty tins, and rope scraps keep washing up or getting tossed aside near the work area. Over time, he quietly assembles a miserable little float from debris and hides it where the tide will not betray him too early. Then, during one routine shift, he slips away from the detail, drags the improvised craft into the water, and trusts a rotten pile of prison junk more than he trusts one more night behind those walls. 43. London, 1966. George Blake is a notorious double agent locked inside the maximum security Wormwood Scrubs prison. His escape depends on something that sounds way too domestic for international espionage: knitting needles. Friends on the outside manage to get a rope ladder over the massive prison wall, but reaching and securing it from Blake's side is the real problem. Using improvised tools, including the thin metal needles, he manages to snag the ladder and work it into position against the unforgiving brick. It is a wet, miserable night, the kind that makes every surface feel designed by Satan. Still, he climbs. A top-tier spy ends up escaping one of Britain's most famous prisons with gear that sounds less like a breakout kit and more like somebody grandma lost it under a couch. 44. The American Revolution, 1781. A captured American spy is held inside a freezing British prison ship anchored in New York Harbor. The vessel is a floating coffin packed with misery, sickness, and heavily armed sailors. Swimming for freedom in that water could kill him before the British ever get the chance. Then he notices the routine nobody respects because it looks too disgusting to matter. Every night, kitchen waste is hauled out and dumped overboard in large barrels and containers. He hides himself inside one of the foul-smelling loads and trusts the guards to be too repulsed to inspect it closely. They drag the stinking weight to the rail and dump it into the harbor. Seconds later, the prisoner bursts free in the icy dark and gambles his life on the current instead of captivity. After all of this, it starts to feel less like security failed, and more like common sense just left the building. So now I'm curious, out of all these ridiculous escapes, which one did we miss that's even dumber than these? There's always that one story that sounds too stupid to be real. Drop it in the comments. And yeah, if this made you question how anything stays secure at all, like the video and subscribe.